Imagine being trapped in enemy hands, thousands of miles from home, with nothing but your instincts to keep you alive. Prisoners of war in World War II developed survival strategies that went far beyond just food and water. Here are the 7 shocking levels of survival strategies POWs used to make it out alive. Basic survival instincts. Imagine the moment of capture. 1 second you're on the battlefield, clinging to a rifle. The next you're surrounded, disarmed, and shoved into enemy hands. For most prisoners of war in World War II, survival began in those chaotic, terrifying first hours. It wasn't about long-term plans or clever tricks yet. It was about staying alive from one moment to the next. The first instinct every POW faced was shock. Soldiers had been trained to fight, not surrender. Some described the moment of capture as feeling like their very identity was stripped away. Gone was the uniformed warrior. In its place stood a vulnerable man, uncertain of his future. Would he be beaten, shot on the spot, forced into grueling marches without food or water? Nobody knew. And in that uncertainty, the human survival instinct took over. Hunger was often the first enemy. Many captured soldiers hadn't eaten properly in days. Their captors sometimes withheld rations to break their spirit. Others were forced to march for miles immediately after capture, with little more than a sip of water along the way. POWs quickly learned to grab anything they could. Leftover bread tossed on the ground, a piece of fruit swiped from a tree, even scraps discarded by guards. Every bite counted, because nobody knew when the next meal would come. Water was even more critical. In tropical regions like the Philippines, American soldiers captured by the Japanese described agonizing thirst during the infamous Bataan Death March. Some risked their lives darting to roadside puddles or streams under the threat of bayonets. Survival meant calculating. Was one gulp of muddy water worth a beating? Or worse, sleep too became a matter of survival. Prisoners packed into rail cars or locked in crude barracks had no choice but to sleep sitting up, shoulder to shoulder. Those who managed even a few minutes of rest were better equipped to face the brutal next day. Others stayed awake, nerves stretched thin, minds racing with fear of what might happen. The harsh reality was clear. In the first days, survival wasn't about clever resistance or escape plans. It was about instinct. Keeping your head down, avoiding unnecessary attention from guards, and securing the bare minimum of food and water. Those who panicked, fought back recklessly, or lost control often paid the price early. Those who stayed calm, who thought ahead even in small ways, gave themselves a chance. And yet once the body's immediate needs were met, once a POW managed to make it past those terrifying first days, a far greater battle began, because surviving capture was only the starting line. The real test was endurance. How long could the human body endure when food, strength, and dignity were stripped away? That's where the next level of survival strategies began: physical endurance. Making it through the initial shock of capture was one thing, but for POWs in World War II, the real war often became one fought inside their own bodies. Starvation, disease, exhaustion, these were enemies just as deadly as bullets or bombs. And prisoners had to develop strategies, both clever and desperate, to keep their bodies alive under impossible conditions. Food was scarce in almost every camp. Captors often gave out rations barely enough for survival. A crust of bread, a thin soup, maybe a handful of rice. Malnutrition quickly set in. Men who once weighed 180 pounds wasted down to 120 or less. Their bodies ate away at muscle, leaving them weak, skeletal, and constantly hungry. Yet many prisoners found ways to stretch what little they had. Some learned to chew slower, to trick their stomachs into feeling fuller. Others hid scraps, saving them for later, even if it meant risking punishment. In the harshest camps, anything remotely edible became fair game. Insects, weeds, even candle wax mixed with water. Disease thrived in these weakened bodies. Dysentery, malaria, and pneumonia were constant threats. Without medicine, survival often came down to sheer endurance. Some prisoners discovered that conserving energy was crucial. Instead of wasting strength on anger or hopelessness, they moved slowly, resting whenever possible, protecting every ounce of energy for the next day's struggle. Those who pushed too hard, trying to prove toughness or fight against exhaustion, often collapsed and never recovered. Work made things even worse. Many POWs were forced into labor camps, building railroads, working mines, or carrying heavy loads under the sun. Guards expected obedience, no matter how starved the men were. Some prisoners pretended to be weaker than they actually were, earning lighter tasks or moments of rest. Others paired up, helping each other carry loads when one man faltered. Small acts of cooperation often meant the difference between life and death. Still, not all strategies were about conserving energy. Some prisoners actively sought tiny ways to strengthen their bodies. In secret, they would do light exercises, squats, stretches, push-ups, not to build muscle, but to keep joints from stiffening and spirits from breaking. Maintaining physical control, even in small ways, was a quiet act of defiance, but the body could only take so much. Endurance wasn't infinite, and every day took its toll. For many POWs, the real enemy wasn't starvation or sickness alone. It was the creeping sense that their bodies were slowly failing, slipping beyond their control. And that realization made the next level of survival all the more vital. Because even when the body weakened, the mind had to remain strong. And in captivity, mental resilience would prove to be just as crucial as physical strength. Mental resilience. When the body started to break down, the real fight shifted to the mind. In the bleak environment of a POW camp, survival often depended less on calories and muscle, and more on whether a man could keep his sanity intact. Depression, hopelessness, and despair killed silently, sometimes faster than starvation. Those who found ways to keep their minds sharp, to protect themselves from slipping into apathy, stood the best chance of making it out alive. Prisoners developed countless mental tricks. Some created routines, even when every day looked the same. One man might wake up and shave with an imaginary razor. Another might schedule push-ups at sunrise, even if his body could barely manage two. These rituals weren't about hygiene or exercise. They were anchors, reminders that life still had structure and meaning. Without such routines, the days bled into each other, dragging men into a haze of hopeless repetition. Others relied on imagination. Prisoners recreated entire meals in their minds, describing dishes to each other in detail, from the sizzling sound of bacon to the smell of fresh bread. Some laughed bitterly, calling it food torture, but for many it was a coping mechanism, a way to trick the mind into remembering what normal life felt like. Others dreamed of walking down familiar streets, meeting their families, or hearing music again. Holding on to those visions gave prisoners something to fight for. Humor also played a vital role. Even in the darkest camps, prisoners found ways to laugh. They mocked their captors behind their backs, shared crude jokes, or staged tiny performances to entertain each other. That laughter didn't erase hunger or pain, but it lifted spirits enough to push through one more day. Psychologists later discovered that POWs who clung to humor were often the ones who survived longest. Yet perhaps the most powerful tool was faith, not necessarily religious, but faith in survival. Many prisoners set mental goals. I will live to see my son's next birthday. Others promised themselves they'd return home no matter what. Some wrote invisible letters in the air each night, whispering words to wives or parents who would never hear them. This determination, fragile as it was, created a shield against despair. But mental resilience wasn't limitless. Not everyone managed to hold on. Some men broke under pressure, becoming withdrawn, silent, and unreachable. For others it was betrayal, when a fellow prisoner gave in to captors and turned on his comrades. Trust shattered and morale collapsed. Survival in the mind was delicate, always under threat, and that's where the next level came in. When mental strength faltered, survival often depended on something even greater: the bonds between men, brotherhood and trust. In the brutal world of POW camps, loneliness was as dangerous as starvation. Isolation bred despair, but solidarity, true brotherhood, could save lives. Time and again, prisoners discovered that survival wasn't an individual effort. It was a collective one. One of the most powerful survival strategies was simple: sharing. A man who had a single crust of bread might break it in half for a sick comrade. That tiny sacrifice not only fed the other man, but reminded both that humanity wasn't dead inside those fences. Stories spread of prisoners giving up their only blanket to a friend shaking with fever, or secretly trading rations so that weaker men could recover. In places where guards tried to pit men against each other, generosity became quiet rebellion. This brotherhood extended to physical support. In forced marches or back-breaking labor, strong men sometimes carried the weak. If one fell behind, others would hoist him up, hiding his weakness from guards who might otherwise beat him or leave him to die. These acts of solidarity created trust, a silent pact that no one would be abandoned, no matter the cost. Equally important was emotional trust. Prisoners leaned on each other for conversation, for storytelling, for reminders of home. One man might recall a childhood story, another might hum a familiar tune. Together, they rebuilt fragments of a world that seemed impossibly far away. In groups, despair lost some of its grip. Alone, it swallowed men whole. But this trust was never without risk. Captors often exploited desperation, offering extra food or privileges to those willing to inform on fellow prisoners. Betrayal struck deep, destroying fragile morale. A single informer could unravel months of solidarity that made brotherhood even more precious, because every act of loyalty, every risk taken to protect another, was an act of defiance against the enemy's control. And there were leaders, natural figures who held groups together. They organized secret lessons, prayers, or even sports in camps where guards allowed it. These leaders weren't always the highest-ranking officers. Often they were simply men who refused to let others give up. Their influence stretched far, reminding prisoners that hope wasn't just individual, it was shared. Brotherhood didn't guarantee survival, but without it, many never stood a chance. And yet, while loyalty kept men alive, it also introduced another weapon into the prisoner's arsenal, the ability to resist, to deceive, and to quietly fight back. Because the next level of survival wasn't just about enduring captivity, it was about outsmarting it. Deception and resistance. For prisoners of war, survival wasn't only about keeping the body alive or the mind sharp. It was also about learning to resist, sometimes quietly, sometimes boldly, while under the constant watch of guards. Deception became a weapon, and resistance, no matter how small, gave POWs a sense of control in a world designed to strip it away. Many prisoners discovered early on that appearing weaker than they were could be a strategy. By exaggerating illness or limping just enough, some avoided the harshest labor assignments. Others played dumb, pretending they didn't understand commands, dragging out tasks until the guards grew frustrated. This wasn't laziness, it was calculated survival. Every ounce of strength saved was another day endured. But deception wasn't only physical. Secret communication became a lifeline. Prisoners developed codes, tapping messages through walls, carving symbols into wood, or slipping hidden notes inside seemingly harmless letters home. Guards often censored or rewrote correspondence, but POWs found ways to sneak through their own messages, warning families or passing intelligence to allies outside. A single coded sentence could be a beacon of hope. Then there was quiet resistance, the kind captors often underestimated. Men would steal tools, sabotage machinery, or hide contraband items like maps, compasses, or radios. A spoon might disappear one day, a piece of wire the next. These tiny thefts added up, fueling escape plans or simply slowing down enemy efforts. Guards might punish entire groups if caught, but the drive to resist rarely disappeared. There were also moments of symbolic defiance. Prisoners stood tall during roll calls, refused to salute guards, or sang patriotic songs under their breath. These acts carried heavy risks, but they reminded everyone that their captors could break their bodies but not their will. Even a glance exchanged between two prisoners during punishment could be an act of resistance, a silent statement, "We're still here, and we won't give in." Some camps even formed underground committees, organizing resistance efforts in secret. Leaders planned escapes, coordinated sabotage, or smuggled information. For many, simply being part of something larger than themselves gave meaning to their suffering. It wasn't just survival anymore, it was a quiet war behind the barbed wire. But deception and resistance came with limits. Guards grew suspicious, punishments were brutal, sometimes fatal, and eventually many prisoners faced the hardest choice: continue resisting from within, or risk everything on a desperate attempt to break free. And that choice led to the next level of survival: escape attempts. For some prisoners, survival meant more than enduring captivity. It meant finding a way out. Escape was the boldest and riskiest survival strategy of all, a gamble where the stakes were freedom or death. And during World War II, countless POWs risked everything to reclaim their liberty. Escape attempts took many forms. The most famous, of course, were tunnel operations. At camps like Stalag Luft 3rd, prisoners spent months digging hidden tunnels, using tin cans as shovels, bedboards as support beams, and even repurposed clothing to carry out dirt. These tunnels stretched for hundreds of feet, hidden beneath barracks and latrines. Guards patrolled constantly, yet the ingenuity of these operations became legendary. The Great Escape alone involved over 600 prisoners in one of the most ambitious tunneling efforts of the war. Others attempted bolder, quicker escapes. Some disguised themselves as guards, tailoring stolen uniforms out of scraps of cloth. Others slipped away during work details, vanishing into forests or towns under the cover of chaos. A few even tried to blend into civilian populations, relying on forged papers and their wits to avoid capture. But escape wasn't just about clever tricks. It demanded unimaginable courage. Anyone caught faced severe punishment. Some were beaten, tortured, or executed as examples to others. Still, the desire for freedom burned too brightly to extinguish. For many POWs, the very act of attempting escape, even if unsuccessful, gave meaning to their suffering. It reminded them they were still soldiers, still fighting. Escape required cooperation. No man could pull it off alone. Fellow prisoners forged documents, built maps from memory, or risked their lives to distract guards during critical moments. Some volunteers stayed behind to cover for missing men, knowing they would face harsher treatment because of it. Escape became not just an individual act of defiance, but a shared mission, one that lifted morale across entire camps. Not every attempt ended in freedom. Most escapees were caught within days, often betrayed by hunger, language barriers, or sheer bad luck. But even failed escapes mattered. They tied up enemy resources, spread confusion, and proved that POWs hadn't surrendered their will to fight. Guards could cage bodies, but not the human spirit. And yet, for those who stayed behind, escape wasn't always an option. Many prisoners realized that survival required a different kind of strength, something beyond running, hiding, or deceiving. It was about holding on to their very sense of self in a world built to erase it. And that final battle would define the ultimate level of survival: identity and humanity. After the battles of body, mind, and spirit, the final struggle for prisoners of war wasn't just about surviving another day. It was about holding on to their humanity in a system designed to strip it away. For many POWs, this was the highest level of survival strategy, refusing to become just a number, refusing to let their captors erase who they were. Captors often tried to reduce prisoners to mere objects, stamping them with numbers, shaving their heads, assigning them to barracks like livestock. The goal was clear: break individuality, erase dignity, and create obedience through dehumanization. Yet prisoners fought back in quiet, defiant ways. Some kept secret diaries, scribbling notes on scraps of paper, documenting their days in shaky handwriting. Others carved initials into wooden planks or bricks, leaving proof that they existed. These small acts of identity were dangerous, but they gave men strength. Faith also played a huge role. In Christian, Jewish, or other religious groups, men risked punishment to hold hidden services, whispering prayers in the dark. Some sang hymns softly after roll call, their voices barely audible, but powerful enough to remind them of who they were before captivity. For others, faith wasn't religious but personal, the faith that families were waiting at home, that children would grow up knowing their fathers had never surrendered in spirit. It was this kind of belief that kept them from slipping into despair. Education became another weapon of humanity. In some camps, men organized universities, teaching each other languages, history, or mathematics. A farmer might learn algebra from a school teacher, while an engineer might share lessons in mechanics. These weren't just distractions, they were affirmations that life still had meaning, that growth was possible even behind barbed wire. Symbols of identity mattered too. Prisoners found ways to celebrate holidays, to mark birthdays, or even to stage plays using handmade costumes. They created their own rituals, celebrating not just survival but life itself. Even laughter, even art, even song, these were acts of rebellion against the crushing machinery of captivity. But the most important part of holding on to humanity was memory. Prisoners remembered their homes, their towns, their loved ones. They told stories of wives, mothers, children, and friends. Memory kept them alive. As long as they could picture those faces, hear those voices in their minds, they weren't defeated. They were still themselves, not broken soldiers, not nameless captives, but human beings. And when liberation finally came, many survivors said that the greatest victory wasn't the fact that they had endured starvation, torture, or endless days of labor. It was that, despite everything, they hadn't allowed their captors to erase who they were. They came home scarred, often broken in body, but with their identities intact. And that, more than anything else, was the triumph. Because in the end, survival in captivity wasn't just about food, water, or even escape. It was about proving that no matter how far the human body could be pushed, the human spirit was always stronger.